Yo, what's up guys, Alpha, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of a deck that I've recently used to get rank 1 with on the Arena ladder. As you can see from the untapped screenshot, I'm currently 61-3 with this deck. Everything before version 4 was when I was doing earlier testing in best of 1. So I'm currently 61-3 with this deck in best of 3, which is insane. I think that's the best win rate I've ever had with a deck. So this definitely feels like by far and away the best deck in the format to me right now. But anyway, before I get into it, there's going to be an MTG zone link down in the description. If you click on that, you'll have the deck list there that you can import into Arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And I'm also in the process of writing a full text article about this deck that will have more details, a full sideboard guide, how I change the deck for best of 1, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's finished and up, I'll link that down in the description. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Naya Lifegain Grinning Ignus combo deck in Alchemy. And like I said, going 61-3 with this deck, this definitely feels like by far and away the best deck in the format to me. And as the name suggests, this is a deck that is built around comboing with this card, a Grinning Ignus. So this is the 3-mana 2/2, and then once it's on the battlefield, we can pay red mana and return it to our hand, and it adds 3 red mana to our mana pool, one of them being red. So the idea with this card on its own is you can pay red mana to return it to your hand, and then you instantly get enough mana to recast it. So every time you can just pay a red mana, return it to your hand and recast it. So the way we're trying to abuse this is trying to reduce the cost of its ability so that we can get infinite enter the battlefield and leaves the battlefield triggers. So the first way we have of doing this is with Racketeer Boss, this new card from Alchemy. So this is a 2-mana 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield we choose up to 2 creatures or planeswalkers in our hand, and they perpetually gain, when you cast this spell, create a treasure token. So the idea with these two cards is you cast the Racketeer Boss with a Grinning Ignus in hand, give it the perpetual ability, and then whenever we cast the Grinning Ignus, it creates a treasure token. We can then sacrifice that treasure token to produce a red mana and return it to our hand. And now at this point we have infinite ways to just recast it, return it to our hand, recast it, return it to our hand over and over again. And we have multiple ways to win utilising that loop over and over again. The second way we have of doing this is with Bergi, God of Storytelling. So this is a 3-mana 3/3, and whenever we cast a spell, we add red mana. So similarly to the Racketeer Boss loops, we just cast the Grinning Ignus. When we cast it, we get a red mana off Bergi. We can pump that red mana into the Grinning Ignus ability to return it back to our hand. And then again, we have a way to just recast it over and over and over again. And I'll show you the ways that we have of abusing that in a minute. Second of all, if we manage to set up 2 of these, so if we have Racketeer Boss to give Grinning Ignus a treasure and Bergi in play, or we've used Racketeer Boss with Grinning Ignus twice, because you can stack the perpetual abilities, we then create infinite mana, because every time we cast Grinning Ignus and return it, we net an extra treasure token, so we can then cast everything from our hand. So that's the main loop in the deck. And then I'll show you now the main ways we have of capitalising on these repeated enter the battlefield and leave the battlefield triggers. So the main way we have of abusing this is with Lifegain enablers. So we have 4 Lunarch Veteran and 4 Prosperous Innkeeper. These are both creatures that gain us a life whenever another creature enters the battlefield. So if we have Grinning Ignus alongside one of these 2, we have a way to gain infinite life. Now obviously, since this is an arena format, it's not technically infinite life because you have to perform all the game actions. You can't just do an infinite loop and go, I'm at infinite life, like you would if you were playing paper. So if you have this set up, you just do it as many times as you need in order to gain you enough life to stabilise. You know, you can do this loop against an aggro deck, for example, go up to like 50 or 60 life, which should be enough to stabilise you, and then buy you enough time to find the other cards to help you win the game. So Lunarch Veteran is also very nice because if it's killed and goes to the graveyard, we can cast it for its disturb cost as Luminous Phantom, and Luminous Phantom says whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, you gain a life. So even though we don't have the Lunarch Veteran, the Luminous Phantom would still work with the Grinning Ignus to gain infinite life, because whenever we bounce it back to our hand, we also then gain an additional life. So it's really nice that Luminous Phantom, even if they kill the Lunarch Veteran, still works as a way to gain infinite life with the Grinning Ignus. So then, like I said, gaining infinite life isn't enough to win the game. So how do we capitalise on that? Well, the first way is with Voice of the Blessed. So if we have a way to gain infinite life and we have a Voice of the Blessed, every time we gain life, we put a +1/+1 counter on Voice of the Blessed. When we hit 4 +1/+1 counters, it gains Flying and Vigilance, and then when it hits 10 +1/+1 counters, it gains Indestructible as well. So if we have infinite life off Grinning Ignus and a Voice of the Blessed, we basically just gain enough life so even if the opponent's going super wide, they're not going to be able to attack around us, and then we just have a huge Indestructible Flying Vigilance Voice of the Blessed. And the only real ways in the format the opponent has of dealing with this is either with Vanishing Verse or Farewell. The Wandering Emperor can't exile it because it has Vigilance, so it never taps when it attacks, and so most decks are going to struggle to beat this even on its own. You know, just having a huge indestructible flying creature that's going to be able to attack every turn, they're going to have to keep chump blocking or find a Vanishing Verse or Farewell, which a lot of decks aren't running. And they can't attack around us either, because, you know, one way to be able to beat a Voice of the Blessed like this is to go super wide and attack around us, but we're gaining infinite life in this process, so they're not going to be able to do that. So Voice of the Blessed is a really effective way to close the game out with infinite life. The second way is with Tradosara Moondancer. So this is pretty similar to Voice of the Blessed. Whenever we gain life, we put a +1/+1 counter, but instead of gaining any extra abilities, we scry one instead. So the idea with Tradosara, if we're gaining infinite life, is we just gain a bunch of life, make a huge Tradosara. Now, unfortunately, unlike Voice of the Blessed, it doesn't gain indestructible, so it can be killed by destruction effects, but we essentially get to scry through our whole deck. And what we're looking for when we scry through our whole deck is Cabaretti Revels. So Cabaretti Revels, now we're talking about it, is another way for us to just instantly win the game if we have the Grinning Ignus Sleep. So Cabaretti Revels, 3 mana enchantment, and whenever we cast a creature spell, we seek a creature with lesser mana value and put it onto the battlefield. So if we have Grinning Ignus looped either with Racketeer Boss or Bergie and we have a Cabaretti Revels in play, we basically get to put every single 2 and 1 mana card from our deck into play. And so the way we win with that is we'll get loads of Lunarch Veterans and Prosperous Innkeepers. We'll potentially get all 4 Voice of the Blessed in play, which will all turn into huge flying indestructible creatures. We can get Tradosara into play as well. But the main way that we have of closing the game out the same turn that we play the Cabaretti Revels is with Dina Soul Steeper. So this is the main reason that Dina is in the deck. It enables us to win the same turn if we have Cabaretti Revels and we're looping with Ignus. So Dina Soul Steeper, whenever we gain a life, each opponent loses a life. So if we have this alongside any of our Lifegain enablers, which will obviously hit because we'll be putting loads of them into play off the Revels, we can just keep casting the Grinning Ignus over and over again, and every time it enters the battlefield we get a ton of Dina triggers, a ton of Lifegain triggers, and we can just kill the opponent immediately. So this is really important because against control decks, for example, they're going to have access to sweepers like Farewell, which is a way to just exile everything. We don't really have a good way to play around Farewell. So it's really important, specifically against control, to have a way to win the game immediately the turn that we play this. Another card that could be used that I've seen some other decks running is the Red Goblin Goro Goro. So instead of playing Dina, you could play the Goro Goro, and then once you've set up your loop and you have a ton of Voice of the Blessed that have, you know, a huge with flying and indestructible, you can then pump the red mana that you get from the treasure or from Bergie into Goro Goro to give all your creatures haste and an attack, which does kill slightly quicker. But the problem with that is it's also slightly more vulnerable, because if the opponent has, you know, if you're against Angels, for example, and they have like chump blockers in the air, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to attack that turn. And also if the opponent has removal against some of your creatures as well, that's not as reliable. So say for example you're playing against a control deck that has a ton of removal. If throughout the course of the game they've managed to exile all of your Voice of the Blessed and you still manage to combo off with Grinning Ignus and Cabaretti Revels, Goro Goro isn't a guaranteed way to win. So I much prefer Dina as just a guaranteed win to way against the control decks. You don't really need this against the aggro decks. So post sideboard, I'll usually board this out for a single copy of Skyclave Apparition, because 4 Voice of the Blessed and infinite life is going to be enough to win against aggro. But against the control decks, it's really important to have this one Dina here so that you're guaranteed to win the turn that you play the Ignus Loop with Cabaretti Revels. So talking about the combo, there's a few tips that I want to give, because you can often time out with the combo before you get to what you want, especially when you're using Cabaretti Revels, because the downside of having Tradosara out when you're comboing off is every single Lifegain trigger you get, you have to scry one. So the most important thing I'd say when comboing off, to be quick, is to use the spacebar. So this is very important if you're using Ignus with Racketeer Boss, because every time you sacrifice a treasure to return it to your hand, if you're not using the spacebar, you have to move your mouse down to submit one in the bottom right hand corner. So it will massively speed up your combo to use the spacebar to submit to sacrifice the treasure. And additionally, when you're comboing off with Tradosara as well, using the spacebar to accept the scry triggers rather than manually clicking will massively increase the speed of the combo as well. So if you have a bunch of Lifegain triggers with Tradosara, you can just mash the spacebar and it will just accept the scry as quickly as possible, so you're unlikely to time out. Because I have quite a few games where I'm going off with Ignus and Revels and I don't manage to find the Dina in time, so it is important to play quickly and to use a spacebar. The other thing I would say as well is in options, if you go to gameplay, when you're playing this deck, you want to make sure that you have auto-ordered triggered abilities ticked, otherwise the combo will take way too long, because you'll have to they'll manually come and like there'll be an extra box that comes up every single time you're putting triggers on the stack, which will slow you down significantly. And as far as I'm aware, there's no disadvantage to ticking this. You know, previously when I was playing the Heliote combo deck, which is kind of a similar deck in Historic, you would sometimes run into issues where you play Inquisitor Captain or Skyclave Apparition, and if you had the Captain triggers resolving after your life gain, you would lose out on potential +1/+1 counters on Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara. Same thing with Skyclave Apparition if the opponent has a way to stop you gaining life. But as far as I'm aware, I think Arena's fixed that now, so that it will always automatically order your triggers so that the Inquisitor Captain resolves before your life gain triggers. So there's no disadvantage as far as I'm aware to having this ticked, and you should always have it ticked just to save you time playing the deck and to save you time comboing off as well. So that's the main way that we combo off. The really nice thing about going more life gain synergy with this deck is that your backup plan is really, really strong. Using Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara as a way to win without even needing Ignus has won me so many games, especially in conjunction with Cabaret Revels. So, you know, like I said, Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara, just in addition to your life gain enablers, is so strong. And with Cabaret Revels specifically, they're really good, because if you have Revels out and then you play one of your Voice of the Blessed or Tradisara, you're guaranteed to hit a Lunarch Veteran, which will enter play before your Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara. So you'll instantly be getting a bunch of life gain triggers straight away, and then anything else you cast after that, you know, you'll get an extra trigger off whatever the Revels puts in play. Oftentimes it'll be another life gain enabler, so that will enter play, which will trigger the first life gain enabler, putting more counters on it. Then the thing you're casting will enter play, which will trigger both of your life gain enablers. So you can completely pop off with Revels and Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara without even needing to go for the Grinning Ignus combo, which is really strong. I think the builds that are focused way more on the combo are much more vulnerable to hate pieces like Archon of Emeria and Silverquill Silencer, for example, whereas this deck can fairly easily beat an Archon of Emeria just by getting Cabaret Revels in play, and then by playing Voice of the Blessed or Tradisara and just getting a huge amount of counters on it. So the really nice thing I like about this particular build of the deck is that the backup plan is really strong. It synergizes really, really well with the Cabaret Revels itself and can win the game on its own. You know, most other builds that I've seen that aren't running more focused around the life gain synergies are relying on, I think it's called the Witty Roastmaster, in order to win the game. And the problem with this card is, first of all, in Alchemy, this is the only card that gives this sort of effect. So Witty Roastmaster, whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you deal 1 damage to each opponent. So the idea with Grinning Ignus and the Roastmaster is you just set up Grinning Ignus loop with Racketeer Boss or Bergie, and then you just repeatedly cast it with Witty Roastmaster on the battlefield, and you just deal damage to the opponent over and over again. The downside of this card is, like I said, this is the only card that can do this sort of effect, so there's no real redundancy for this card, whereas the life gain synergies in the deck, you have 4 Lunarch Veteran and 4 Prosperous Innkeeper, so you're way more likely to find it. Second of all, it's a 3 mana card, and the difference between a 3 mana card and a 1 mana and a 2 mana card is huge. Lunarch Veteran and Prosperous Innkeeper being 1 and 2 mana is great. The fact that we can still get infinite life off the backside of Lunarch Veteran even when it's killed is huge as well, and these also synergize really well with the rest of the deck. The downside of Witty Roastmaster is it really doesn't have much synergy when you're not comboing off. You know, you can deal chip damage throughout the course of the game, but that's not really super useful if you're not going super wide, which the deck isn't that great at doing when you don't have the Ignus combo. And additionally, the life gain synergies just help you stabilize against aggro. You know, this deck has a naturally good matchup against almost all of the aggro decks because we're a life gain deck, and we can get huge creatures onto the battlefield really quickly through Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara. So I really, really like the life gain backup plan, and you can just win the game on its own just with Voice of the Blessed and Tradisara because they're such powerful cards compared to the rest of the format. So then the other cards in the deck, like I said, Bergie is a really nice enabler for the Grinning Ignus combo, but it can also be played as Harmfell Horn of Bounty, which I've done multiple times, especially against decks that have a lot of removal. You know, if you don't have many creatures left and you have a Bergie, you can just cast this as Harmfell, and then it enables you to grind really effectively because any dead draws you make, you know, say you draw a land, you can just discard it to exile the top 2 cards. So you basically turn any dead draw into another 2 looks to try and find good cards, which is really nice. And then we've also got 4 copies of Inquisitor Captain at the top end of the deck, which is really nice at helping to dig for all of our combo pieces, and works especially well with the Cabaret Revels, especially when we have our life gain enablers and a Voice of the Blessed or Tradisara in play, because we cast the Captain, we get a 3-drop or lower off the Cabaret Revels, then Inquisitor Captain enters the battlefield and finds another card. So if we have a Lifegain Enabler and a Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara on the battlefield, that puts so many +1/+1 counters on it. And additionally, like I said, it helps us to dig for all of our combo pieces. If we have a Burgi or Racketeer boss, we can dig for the Ignus. If we have a Lifegain Enabler, we can dig for a Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara. And then there are also a lot of other creatures we've got in the sideboard that are really useful to dig for with Inquisitor Captain. Then in terms of the mana base, we've got 24 lands here, which has felt like a decent amount overall. The mana base itself is probably the weakest part of the deck, because we need double white for Voice of the Blessed, we need green white for Trelisara, we need red green for Racketeer boss, etc. The treasures that we can get off Racketeer boss and Prosperous Innkeeper go a long way to help that, but I really wanted to ensure that I was running all dual lands to enable this much more often. So Jetmir's Garden is obviously the best land in the whole deck because it can give us access to all 3 of our colours. The rest of the deck are all pathways and slow lands, and it's been quite hard to juggle which are the right numbers of this, because the downside of the slow lands, in addition to the Jetmir's Garden, is obviously that you might end up in situations where you have to play tap lands for the first 2 turns of the game. Thankfully, Alchemy isn't that fast a format that you get punished for that, really. But the downside of running too many pathways is you can be locked out of certain colours, which can, is especially problematic when you're trying to cast Voice of the Blessed, because if you have to cast one of your white pathways on the opposite colour, that can often just lock you out of playing Voice of the Blessed. So I've liked this current setup, especially running 4 of the white slow lands to enable Voice of the Blessed a lot of the time. So that's the main deck. It's felt so strong to me. Honestly, I don't normally say this, but this deck feels a step above every single other deck in the format to me. Now onto the sideboard, starting off with 4 copies of Curse of Silence. So this card is here pretty much exclusively for the mirror match, and I want to give a big shout out to Omri on this. He's at OmriThopter on Twitter, and he suggested this card, and it has been the best card in the mirror match. So basically the way this card works is you play it for 1 mana and you name Grinning Ignus in the mirror match. And it basically means that the Grinning Ignus for the opponent will now cost 5 mana. So you can sacrifice this to draw a card, but you want to keep this on the battlefield, and it will basically just completely stop the opponent from comboing off because it taxes the cost of Grinning Ignus by 2. So if you can get this in play against a mirror match and they don't have a Skyclave Apparition to kill it, you basically just stop them from comboing off, so they're completely reliant on whatever the backup plan in their deck is. And most of the other versions of this deck that I've seen are very much all in on the combo, so they really don't have good ways to to beat you. If you're against a mirror match where the opponent is playing the exact same deck that I am, they could potentially win off the Voice of the Blessed or whatnot. But if you can get this in play, it doesn't stop you comboing off, so it will usually buy you enough time, especially if you're going second, to set up your combo, and basically just shuts the opponent out from the game completely, which is huge. So this is by far and away the best card in the mirror match, and every time I've resolved this against another Grinning Ignus deck, they've not been able to win. So big shout out to Omri on this one. Then I've got 3 copies of Thalia, so this is here pretty much exclusively for the control matchup. Thalia and Elite Spellbinder are both here for control. And Thalia, the only non-creature that we're running in the whole deck is Cabaret Revels, so this is going to hurt them way more than it hurts you. And similarly with Elite Spellbinder, being able to tax the most important card in their hand is really huge. And so when we're bringing these in, we just trim on our Lifegain synergies a little bit, cut Trelisara, trim on some Prosperous Innkeeper and Voice of the Blessed, and just bring in some hate pieces that will shut off the opponent's counter spells and wraths, etc. And then you can often just beat down with these in order to win the game. Or more often than not, the opponent will have to tap out to deal with them, which then opens a window for you to resolve a Cabaret Revels or just go off with the combo. So Thalia and Spellbinder is really important against control, because one of the ways that I have lost with this deck is against decks that have a lot of interaction, stuff like Void Rend for your Cabaret Revels and Vanishing Verse for Voice of the Blessed. So having a way to tax those sorts of effects gives you an edge in that matchup and allows you to be the favourite games 2 and 3. And we've also got 4 copies of Skyclave Apparition, so this is here really importantly to be able to deal with hate pieces. If you see the opponent playing Archon of Emeria or Silvercord Silencer or Curse of Shaken Faith, or like in the mirror match, if people start running my particular build of the deck, you might also have to bring in Skyclave Apparition in the mirror match to deal with Curse of Silence, but Apparition is really important to be able to deal with hate pieces specifically. Against most aggro decks, I don't actually tend to bring Apparition in because the Lifegain synergies in this deck are usually good enough to beat most aggro decks. So for example, RG Werewolves and Mono Green, I've found that the Lifegain Voice of the Blessed Trelisara plan is good enough against them. But there are also some other decks that are actually able to race you. So Runes, for example, is a deck that can get an insane amount of power onto the battlefield quickly and rely on 1 or 2 big creatures. So Apparition is here First of all, to deal with hate pieces like Archon of Emeria that stop you comboing off, and second of all, to deal with aggro decks, but only aggro decks that are able to race you, so runes for example. Most other aggro decks where the Lifegain synergies are good enough, you don't really want to be sideboarding, and since this deck is so high synergy, there are a decent amount of matchups where I don't sideboard. So Esper, for example, is a matchup where I generally don't sideboard unless I see them bring in something like an Archon of Emeria, and then I'll bring in the Apparition to deal with that. So that's the deck. Like I said, this deck has felt just a step above everything else in the format, and I've been doing insanely well with it. Plus, it's been a fun deck to play because I love playing combo as well. But anyway, if you've got any questions at all, you drop me a comment below. Next up, I've got 5 matches that I was playing with this deck on the ladder so you guys can see it in action. So I hope you enjoy the gameplay. Big up. Okay, sweet. Here we go. Okay, so we're going first here. And yeah, this hand looks sweet. We've got both Racketeer Boss and Bergie to enable the Ignus combo. We've got Innkeeper as well, so potentially infinite life. We can use the Bergie to play on Harnfell if we already have Racketeer Boss with Ignus set up, and then all we have to draw at that point is a Tradisara or Voice of the Blessed or a RG Werewolves, and we're in great shape. So yeah, definitely keep here. And being on the play is nice as well. So we'll lead on the farmland, and then we can play the Pathway on red next turn to play the Racketeer Boss. Okay, sweet. A second Racketeer Boss is great here because that enables us to play another Racketeer Boss next turn, and then we can make infinite mana off the Ignus. So if we play Racketeer Boss next turn, we can give Ignus the Perpetual ability a second time. Okay, looks like we're against either mono green or werewolves here, not sure which one. I'm going to play this on green, I think. Bit annoying that we don't have double white for Voice of the Blessed yet, but we have treasures that we can make off both Ignus and Innkeeper, and it looks like we're going to be able to go for Ignus and make infinite mana next turn, so we can loop Ignus over and over again, make infinite mana. We have Innkeeper and Voice of the Blessed, so if they tap out here, we can potentially get a essentially infinitely big Voice of the Blessed with Indestructible, and then we could also use Bergie to play on the backside in order to discard whatever we draw for the turn. And since we'll have infinite mana, we can be able to cast everything in our hand, so definitely going to trade off here. Don't really have much use in particular for the Racketeer bosses. So we'll lead on the Innkeeper here. You know, it's technically probably correct just to start playing Ignus first because that will get infinite mana, but we can afford to play the Innkeeper first, so it doesn't really matter here. So every time we cast the Ignus here, it's going to be creating 2 treasures, so we're netting a mana every single time. We essentially have infinite mana here. I'm going to be using the spacebar to bounce the Ignus back to my hand rather than having to move the cursor all the way down to the bottom right just to save a bit of time, which is definitely important when you're playing this deck. Learning when to use the spacebar will help speed up the combo a lot. So I'm going to bounce the Ignus here, play Voice of the Blessed, and now Voice of the Blessed will start getting counters, and we can keep playing Ignus, play one of these Bergies as Harnfell, and then discard it to see what we hit off the top 2 cards. But I'm pretty sure against Werewolves, which is what it looks like we're against here, they're not going to be able to beat Infinite Life and a huge Voice of the Blessed regardless, so pretty confident that we're going to be winning this game. So Voice of the Blessed will gain Flying and Vigilance on the next loop. And then, once we get up to 10 counters, it'll gain Indestructible as well. Yeah, okay, sweet. So, we do have Apparition in the sideboard, but I think this is a matchup where we can just rely on the Lifegain to get us there. You know, I think the only real aggro decks that I want Apparition against are either decks that bring in hate pieces against us, like Archon of Emeria, or maybe a deck like Runes, which Runes is much faster at racing because they can have crazy draws where they just make like a 15 or 16 power creature with trample that can actually win on turn 3 or 4. So Apparition against aggro decks, I'll bring it in against Runes for example, but for the most part, since we're a Lifegain deck, we're pretty good at stabilizing anyway, and the main deck is so streamlined and efficient that I think I quite like keeping the deck as it is in matchups where you don't really need sideboard cards, just because it is so efficient at what it's doing. So we'll lead on the Sundown Pass. So this hand looks pretty decent. You know, I like keeping basically any hand with RG Werewolves because it's just the most powerful card in the whole deck. So play the Knock Veteran here. It is a bit unfortunate we've not drawn our 3rd land yet. So next turn, if we can draw our 3rd land, I think we can still afford to take a turn off to play Revels. Getting Revels into play on turn 3 is huge, and then we could play Voice of the Blessed, tutor up a Veteran off the Revels, and then it will immediately turn into a 4/4. Okay. Not drawing a 3rd land there is a little bit rough. We can play Tradisara to scry for it, which is important. Okay, sweet. So we do have a land on top. So I'm just trying to think. I mean, it depends what they play this turn, whether we can afford to play Revels next turn. Missing that land drop could be problematic. Oh wow, okay, Town Razor Tyrant, that's pretty rough. So now I don't think we can really afford to play Revels next turn. I think we have to block. Yeah, so they're not going to attack with the Stormseeker, which is good for us, I think. I think we have to block the pack leader here, unfortunately, otherwise we're just taking too much damage. And I'm not sure whether we want to be sacrificing our land off the Town Razor Tyrant here. And like I said, I would love to play Revels. Missing that third land drop was pretty rough. I think we just have to play Voice of the Blessed here, though, to try and stop the damage a little bit. And I think we kind of have to just take the 2 damage off the land here for Town Razor Tyrant, which is a little bit rough. But I don't think we can afford to sack a land. But yeah, we'll see what else they have. We might be able to stabilise if we can keep hitting land drops here. Oh wow, okay. Yeah, we've definitely lost this then. I mean, we missed our third land drop and the opponent had a pretty sick curve out here. Almost completely ideal, yeah. We're definitely going to concede this one, not winning that. So that was a bit rough. I think if we'd hit our third land drop on time, we'd have actually had a chance there. But having said that, their curve out was pretty insane. We could think about bringing Apparition in again, but you know, I think the main reason that we weren't able to stabilise that last game was just because we missed a land drop and they were on the play and had pretty crazy curve out. I think the only way that curve out could have been any better was if they had Tenacious Pup on turn 1. So going into game 3 on the play, I'm still pretty confident that the Lifegain in the deck is probably going to be good enough to stabilise us. Because every time I faced this matchup in the past, you know, bringing Apparition in, you have to kind of cut the Lifegain synergies a bit, which makes you better at dealing with certain permanents, but it makes your linear game plan less consistent. And the linear game plan in this deck is just naturally good against aggro because it's built around Lifegain. So obviously go first here. Yeah, this looks pretty decent. You know, we've got Racketeer Boss ready for in case we draw Ignus. And we've got 2 Lifegain enablers alongside Trelisara, which is great in the early game. You know, getting Trelisara down early and helping us to scry for our payoffs or lands if we need is really sick. Okay, no turn 1 from the opponent is great to see. So we'll lead on the Veteran here. Obviously we would love to draw our third land because then we could potentially go Innkeeper into Trelisara, which could be sick, or just Innkeeper. So unfortunately we miss our third land again, but the opponent's start is a fair bit slower. Ranger class, okay, we're definitely going to scry anything away that isn't a land, but Ranger class is much less threatening than the Werewolf pack leader. So we'll see what they play here. Okay, they got Tovolar. That's fine now because they can't really attack. Okay, sweet. We did hit our third land, which is important. It's a bit annoying that it's a tap land, but not the end of the world. So, again, I think we want to save Racketeer Boss here. I'd rather just get another Lifegain enabler into play while we have Trelisara. Voice of the Blessed is not bad here, but again, with Cabaretti Revels in hand, I think we just want to keep hitting lands, because if we do hit an untapped land, we could potentially go Revels into Racketeer Boss to hit another Lunark Veteran, which would be sick, make Trelisara really big. Even though Voice of the Blessed would be sick, you know, because we're missing land drops, it means that we can't get Cabaretti Rebels into play as quickly. Okay, so they can boost the Wolf token to a 4/4. They do draw a card off us letting this through, but I really don't think that's much of an issue because we're just going to be going way over the top of them. So again, you know, it's a bit rough that we missed land drops there, and like I said, we would have loved to get Rebels into play, but I think getting Captain into play here is huge, and hitting Voice of the Blessed here is great as well because we get so many we get so many Lifegain triggers. So we're just scrying either for Ignus or for a land here. If we hit Ignus, we can just give it give it the perpetual ability from Racketeer Boss and pop off. Oh sweet, there's the Ignus. If we didn't hit Ignus, hitting another land is also decent because then we can get Revels and Veteran into play. But now, you know, the Lifegain payoffs are huge here. You know, Voice of the Blessed is already a 6/6, Trelisara is an 8/8, so we're in pretty sick position here. Next turn, we can just go Lunark Veteran into Racketeer Boss, get another bunch of counters on our Voice of the Blessed and Trelisara, and then set up for Grinning Ignus to just give us infinite life and infinite counters on Voice of the Blessed and Trelisara the following turn. Okay, so this Wolf token's a 7/7. Very happy to just chump with the Inquisitor Captain here. Don't really want to get rid of anything else. You know, the Lifegain payoffs and the Lifegain enablers are really important here. And I didn't want to risk blocking with the Trelisara in case they had some sort of pump spell. They did leave mana open, so it's not worth the risk. And Inquisitor Captain isn't really doing anything here, so going to lead on the Veteran here, get a bunch of extra triggers for the Voice and the Trelisara. Land on top is nice as well. Get a few more triggers for the Voice and Trelisara, like I said, and then we can go for Racketeer Boss next turn, which is sick. Set up to go off with Ignus the following turn, which again I'm pretty sure is going to be good enough to close the game out. Red-green don't really have good tools to deal with a huge Voice of the West. Yeah, okay. Sick. Okay, so we're going second here. See what our opening hand's like in a second. Okay, I think this is a pretty reasonable keep. We don't have anything too synergistic going on right now, but we have a lot of very good top decks. You know, any of our Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara is great with double Lunarch Veteran. Bergi or Racketeer Boss is great with Grinny Ignus. Inquisitor Captain is just decent top end, so... Okay, Bergi's nice. So now we have a way to potentially gain infinite life already, which is pretty sick. So opponent is obviously on runes here, which... Runes on the draw can be a bit scary, because they are one of the decks that even can race through the life gain sometimes. So we'll definitely play Bergi on 3 here, because that gives us the option to gain infinite life if they do pop off this turn. No point in attacking, I don't think, because we're typically going to win by going way over the top of them, so getting in for a single point of damage probably isn't going to make a huge difference here. Okay, Hallowed Haunting again, I'm kind of happy to see that because it just means they're kind of slower. They need to race in the first few turns. So going to play the Lunarch Veteran here, because with Bergi in play it's essentially free. We could go for Ignus for infinite life, but Inquisitor Captain here will take us up to 19 at least, which is probably going to be good enough to stabilise. And we have loads of good hits here. If we hit Ignus, we can still combo off. Oh wow, we hit Voice of the Blessed. Okay, that's sick. I was going to say, if we hit Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara, that's sick. Because now with Voice of the Blessed in particular, we can loop Ignus next turn. And if they don't have a flying blocker, we just win the game basically. They either need to kill Voice of the Blessed or get some flying blockers in play. Which they could technically do that off Hallowed Haunting if they manage to get, what, 6 or 7 enchantments into play this turn, but I think that's pretty unlikely. So if they don't kill Voice of the Blessed here, or they don't get a flying blocker, we can just loop Ignus next turn, and Voice of the Blessed will just keep getting bigger and bigger until we make it big enough for us to be able to swing for lethal in the air. Okay, yeah, they only managed 6 damage, so that's fine. They do go up to 29, but we can just loop the Ignus here. And it shouldn't take us very long to get Voice of the Blessed up to 30 power, considering we have 2 Lunarch Veterans in play. So we play the Ignus, triggers the Veterans, which makes the Voice bigger. We can bounce the Ignus back to our hand again, triggers the Bergi, triggers the Lunarch Veterans again, so Voice of the Blessed becomes bigger. And then we'll just keep doing this over and over again until we have Voice of the Blessed at 30 power. Yeah, okay, sick. So Runes is one of the aggro decks where I do want to be bringing in Apparition, because they can race if they just make one of their creatures huge straight away. I think we can trim Trelisara here. We can trim on our life gain synergies a bit. I think since we're trimming Trelisara, we can afford to trim Innkeeper as well. Out of the two, I think Voice of the Blessed is the much more important card, because it enables us to... Well, it's much more sturdy and much more reliable at closing the game out when we are comboing off, because giving it Flying, Vigilance and Indestructible makes it easier to get in for damage and much harder to kill as well, whereas Trelisara is pretty weak to both just destruction removal and champ blockers as well. So this hand is pretty nice. We've got Apparition and the mana to cast it, and we've also got Racketeer Boss and Ignus, so we've already got access to infinite life. Well, technically infinite life if we need it. Okay, so the lead on Generous Visitor. We're just going to play the Jetmir's Garden here. And then we do... I don't think we can afford to play Racketeer Boss next turn unless we happen to draw another land, because we want this Needle Verge pathway to be on white, which means that we can't afford to play the Racketeer Boss this turn, because if we play that pathway on red, that takes us off double white for both Voice of the Blessed and Skyclave Apparition, which is a bit of an issue. Okay, so opponent's off to a pretty fast start here, but like I said, we've still got access to Racketeer Boss. We could play Apparition here as well if we wanted to. So like I said, we're definitely going to play that on white. I don't think we're that close to dying next turn, so I think we're going to Racketeer Boss here and give the treasure ability to, obviously, Ignus. You always want to put it on Ignus, and then probably Voice of the Blessed as well, because we're trying to set up Voice of the Blessed plus Ignus as a way to win, just like we did last game. Okay, so the opponent does have quite a lot of ways to buff their board here already, which is quite scary. Rune of Sustenance we're not bothered about because we're going to be able to hopefully deal infinite damage with Voice of the Blessed. So here we can play Voice of the Blessed and Grinning Ignus in the same turn here, and we should be able to loop it. So the idea here is we're just going to, same as last game, keep casting Grinning Ignus over and over again, except we're going infinite with the treasures rather than Bergie this time. So again, we want to make sure that we're using spacebar to sack treasures just to save a bit of time. And we're just going to be looping this over and over and over again here. So cast Ignus, pay a red mana to bounce it back to our hand off the treasure, and just keep recasting it over and over again. I'm trying to think of a safe amount to take Voice of the Blessed up to. I think we need to go... So if the opponent gets in for another attack with Cameo Transients next turn, that'll put them up to at least 32. So I think we probably want to go up to about 40-ish on Voice of the Blessed. So if the opponent makes us play this out, I might just skip forwards because the loop isn't particularly interesting and it's just the same thing over and over again. So if the opponent makes us play it out here, which they could do because they might have ways to beat it, I don't know. I'm just going to skip forwards because all I'm doing here is just playing Ignus and bouncing it again. So yeah, see you in a minute if they do make us play it out. Okay, so just to be extra safe here, I've gone up to 41-41 on Voice of the Blessed, and I've bounced Grinning Ignus back to my hand just so it doesn't get hit by removal if they do have removal. So hopefully this will be good enough to win the game. They need to make Cameo Transients really huge, and even if they do, we can just loop Grinning Ignus again to make Voice of the Blessed even bigger. Oh, okay. So they have enchantment removal for the Voice of the Blessed, which is a little bit annoying. But thankfully, since we did loop Ignus over and over again, we're at 48 life, which is hopefully going to be more than enough to close the gate. Well, to stop them from just racing us here. We do also have Skyclave Apparition here, which is pretty huge. So we can Apparition the Touch of the Spirit Realm to get back the Voice of the Blessed, which is pretty sick. And then we can just keep playing Ignus here because it now makes infinite mana. Since we've given it two of the Racketeer boss abilities, it just makes a treasure every time. So we can keep looping the Ignus here, then play the Skyclave Apparition to exile Touch of the Spirit Realm, and then keep looping Ignus again to make Voice of the Blessed big enough to attack again. And then hopefully, as long as they don't have another Touch of the Spirit Realm, that should be good enough to win the game, hopefully. So we'll cast the Apparition here, which will make a treasure when we play it as well. Exile Touch of the Spirit Realm to get back the Voice of the Blessed, and then just start looping the Ignus again here to make it really big. And again, if the opponent makes us play it out again, I'll just skip forwards because it's not particularly interesting just watching me loop Grinning Ignus over and over again. So we'll just see if the opponent makes us play it out here. I mean, they could because they might have another Touch of the Spirit Realm, which is fair. And at that point, we are kind of out of gas if they do have another one, but they need to have it this turn specifically. And even if they do, the great thing about being able to gain a bunch of life here is that we can put the game out of reach so they can't just immediately kill us, which should hopefully give us enough draw steps to find another way to close the game out here. So again, if the opponent makes us play it out, I'll just skip forward so you don't have to watch me looping Ignus over and over again. Okay, so the opponent conceded. Nice, we got there. Okay, so we're going second here. And I can't keep this because it's a one-lander, and it's obviously a tap land as well. And yeah, this looks pretty good. Cabaretti Revels is just one of the best cards in the deck, so I always, or almost always, want to keep our hand with Cabaretti Revels. I think we have to keep both Jetmir's Garden here because we want double white for Voice of the Blessed. And I think I'm going to put back the Rockvale Fall because we're going to have enough colours off the Jetmir's Garden anyway, and there's a chance we want to play Innkeeper or Racketeer Boss on turn 2. Innkeeper's probably going to be what we go for. If we draw a Grinning Ignus though, we can just slam the Racketeer Boss on turn 2, which is great. Okay, Undercity Plunder. So normally I don't like discarding lands to these sorts of discard spells because it's more important to have lands to be able to cast what you draw off the top of the deck, but since we've just drawn our third land and the only card in the deck that costs more than 3 mana is Inquisitor Captain, I think I'm happy discarding the Jetmir's Garden here because we already have enough to cast everything in our hand, and if we happen to draw Inquisitor Captain, we will have the treasure to be able to cast it. So against Esper here, I'm definitely going to slam the Revels because that's, I mean, it's one of the best cards in the deck, but it's also one of the best cards in this matchup because their main strength against us from the Esper side is the amount of single target creature removal they run, and also they sometimes run Mythic Massacre as well, and Revels are just sick at making it very difficult for them to interact favourably with their single target removal, so getting Revels into play is pretty huge here. And then we've got quite a few options next turn. If we draw another land, or another untapped land, we can go Revels into Treadasara, which would be sick, because then we can guaranteed pull two Lunark Veterans out of the deck, which is pretty good. But we'll see what we draw for turn here. Interesting. Okay, Voice of the Blessed is pretty nice, and that is pretty appealing to play here, because getting that to a flyer when they have a Rafine into play is pretty good. The only downside of that is that they run Vanishing Verse pretty commonly, which would be a pretty bad trade for us if they play Vanishing Verse to kill the Voice of the Blessed. So I'm just going to play the Treadasara here. We'll get 2 Scries off it because it pulls the Lunark Veteran out of the deck. And now we're just looking for either another land or a Grinning Ignus so that we can combo off. Because we have Revels in play. If we can have Ignus here, we can play Racketeer Boss, give it the Perpetual Treasure ability, and then we can just cast basically our entire deck off the Revels by bouncing Ignus over and over again. And if we can hit a land, then we can play Revels and Voice of the Blessed in the same turn, which is also pretty sick. You know, we've already got 2 Lifegain enablers in play. If we can get a second Revels in play, we'll then have 3 Lunark Veterans, we'll get a ton of counters off the on the Treadasara and the Voice of the Blessed. Okay, so another Plunder. I think, as good as Revels is in the matchup, I think since we already have one in play, we can afford to discard another one here. I want to keep Racketeer Boss as a way to go infinite if we draw Ignus. And Voice of the Blessed is really nice as a finisher here. You know, we can potentially get it up to a 6/6 without even needing Ignus because we already have so many, well, we already have 2 Lifegain enablers in play. Even if we just cast the Voice next turn, we'll have an extra Lunark Veteran in play as well, which is pretty sick. So they just attack with their Rafine. They do get a Racketeer Boss off the Undercity Plunder, which is a little bit annoying because it'll allow them to commit to the board a little bit more aggressively if they have creatures in hand because they get extra treasures. Okay, another Treadasara. That's not too bad, but nothing great since we already have the first one in play. But we'll just lead on the Voice of the Blessed here and start scrying. Dina's interesting, but I think we want to keep that in the deck in case we draw the Ignus. Now, even if we do draw Dina, we can still go infinite with Ignus and Revels because we'll get treasures off Innkeepers from the deck, which will then allow us to cast the Dina off treasure mana. So since we have so many scries here, I think we're just going to try and look for the Ignus if we can. Although Captain can get us to Ignus, but I think we can do better. Okay, we'll bottom the Innkeeper as well. And then, again, we want to hold on to Racketeer Boss for Ignus here. We can just attack him with Treadasara. We're already back to 21, which is pretty sick. One more trigger of Lifegain will turn Voice of the Blessed into a 6/6 flyer. And we have a 9/9 Treadasara on the battlefield as well. And they're down to 8. So we're definitely way ahead on tempo here, which is a good start. And the other great thing is, you know, their removal is mostly either Vanishing Verse or Meathook Massacre. So they're going to really struggle to deal with this Treadasara as things stand. Interesting they choose to attack with the Racketeer Boss here. So, that makes me think they might have Meathook Massacre. Like, obviously we could block with Voice of the Blessed here, but if they have Meathook Massacre, I don't want them to be able to just play Meathook Massacre and kill the Voice of the Blessed. Plus, we're gaining so much life off these Lifegain enablers that I think we can just afford to take 5 damage here and it's not a big deal. Okay, they just kill the Voice of the Blessed, so we don't really have good blocks anyway, but I think that's fine. So they need to get a blocker in play here, obviously, or we can just attack them down with the Treadasara. So they need to have removal or another blocker. Okay, I mean that's pretty good against us. What do we discard here? Racketeer Boss is only really good if we draw Ignus, and having the second Treadasara in hand enables us to follow up, so we can pretty freely attack here with everything. They're forced to block with the Connoisseur, and then we can just play Treadasara main phase 2. We get another Lunark Veteran in play, so we'll get so many scries off the Treadasara here. Happy to play the land because that's not really going to be relevant unless we're playing the Harnfell. So we'll play another Trelisara here, and we get 4 Scries, which is pretty sick. So we'll see what we hit. I mean, to be honest, Ignus is pretty good even without a way to go infinite. Voice of the Blessed. I'm going to bottom that because our current board state is pretty weak to Mythic Massacre, so I want to try and find something that's a little bit better. I think I'm pretty happy going for Bergie here, actually. Because Bergie will trigger the Revels, obviously, and is good if we then draw Ignus. We could also play it as the Harnfell side, to then enable us to dig for other stuff if we needed. Okay, interesting. They're attacking with Racketeer Boss. Now, again, that could mean that they just want to connive with an extra time if they're trying to dig for removal, but again, I don't think I want to be blocking here because it's kind of a complete blowout if they have the Mythic Massacre. Because we block, Trelisara goes down to 3 toughness, they can just Meathook for X equals 3 and completely wipe our board, which is pretty disastrous. So, I think we're just going to be letting this damage through. And again, we're at 23, we can afford to take extra damage here. So yeah, we can take 6 and not have to worry. They could still Mythic Massacre for 1, which would be a bit annoying because then we lose all of our life gain enablers. But we can play the Veterans from the graveyard, and we've got Bergie that we can play as a creature to try and dig for. Okay, yeah, they do have that. That's a bit annoying, but we can play Bergie and just try and dig for another life gain enabler. Or we have the Lunark Veterans we can play from the graveyard, which is pretty nice as well. And the other great thing is if we draw Ignus, the Lunark Veterans in the graveyard still work as infinite life gain because they count when creatures leave the battlefield. So, I think I'm just trying to debate whether to play Bergie as a creature or not. I think I'm going to lead on attacking here, just because we need to get rid of that Connoisseur anyway. And if we hit a Trelisara off the Bergie, we'll have to lose it to the Legend Rule anyway, so if we don't attack with the Trelisara, we don't have any life gain enablers in play to get any more Scries off it, really. And if we don't attack there, we're just not going to be able to attack cleanly until that City Stalker Connoisseur dies anyway. And had we played Bergie first and not attacked, if we hit a second Trelisara, that's kind of a nightmare there, so that's why I attacked there. That is one of the downsides of Trelisara, and one of the reasons why I much prefer keeping Voice of the Blessed in when I'm sideboarding, just because Trelisara is much more vulnerable to stuff like City Stalker Connoisseur, stuff like chump blockers on the ground, any sort of destruction-based removal as well. So, I mean, there is maybe an argument to keeping Trelisara alive so that we get extra Scries off the Luminous Phantom trigger, but that kind of relies on us, on the opponent killing our creatures, which isn't a guarantee. You know, there's a good chance that they might have just chosen not to kill the Bergie there, if we'd still had Trelisara in play, because it would have given us extra Scries. And like I said, if we don't attack with Trelisara there, that City Stalker is just going to be stonewalling our attacks on the ground basically the whole game. And like I said, if we'd hit a second Trelisara off Bergie, we're just losing so much value at that point. So in general, I think that was probably the right play. Okay, so they blitz the underdog. They're trying to get aggressive here, which makes sense. Interesting that they're not attacking with Rafine. I guess they're at low enough life total here that they're worried that we're going to be able to force a bunch of damage through. Definitely not going to block since it has Blitz. You know, it's going to be dying at the end of the turn anyway. Okay, Agent of Rafine. Interesting. Okay, another land isn't ideal. I mean, I can't... Obviously, the way things are panning out now, I'm kind of regretting not playing the Bergie as the Horn of Hamfell. I'm going to keep this land in hand, kind of as a bluff, but also in case we draw another Bergie, we might want to play it as the Horn, in which case we can discard our land to try and look for 2 more cards. Oh, okay. We did get punished by Plunder, but with 5 lands in play, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference, because we can already cast anything we draw off the top of the deck anyway, so... So yeah, we do need to draw something, just a non-land here. Having Revels in play is huge, because we can just get a bunch of stuff on the battlefield really quickly, depending on what we draw here. And the opponent's still at a relatively low life total, so... They can't really afford to get too aggressive here, or we can just swing back. So we're definitely happy to block here. You know, 4-3 with a 3-2 is a decent trade, even though they have the Mythic Massacre out, so they do get a bit of a swing in life total, but it's not a huge deal. Plus we gain a 3 life off the Luminous Phantom here, so... And if we don't block, that's an extra creature they can attack with to trigger the Rafine ability as well, so I think it's pretty important for us to not let them get much value off the Rafine if we can dodge that. Another City Stalker. I mean, that's fine with our current board state. Okay, Captain is a sick draw here. Okay, we hit Bergie. What do we hit off the Captain? Wow, we hit Ignus, so we've got infinite life here technically now. We can start using the Ignus straight away. Gain 3 life. So this is really sick because it basically... We can just keep looping this over and over again and put our whole deck into the battlefield basically. And we're gaining 3 life every time we bounce it. So that was a pretty perfect setup there, honestly. Couldn't have hit much better, I don't think. Now we got Trelisara. I mean, I might as well scry, but it's kind of a waste of time because we should technically win. Because we will just keep putting everything from our deck into play until we hit Dina, which can then deal infinite damage, but sometimes, especially when we got Trelisara in play, you can time out before hitting Dina, so I think I might as well scry. Oh, one of the other important things to note as well is that... Oh, we hit Dina straight away, okay. So we should win pretty quickly, but yeah. One other important thing that's very important to note with Trelisara is that seeking with Cabaretti Revels doesn't... it doesn't shuffle your deck. So if you do scry something to the top, it will stay there even if you're seeking cards with Revels, but it doesn't matter because we're just going to win off the Dina. I don't know how to pronounce it. But yeah, we should be pretty easy winning here because we're just going to be dealing infinite damage off the Dina now. So Green Ignus enters, it'll trigger again. Now all we've got to do is just bounce the Green Ignus. We get 3 more triggers off the Luminous Phantom and that'll just kill the opponent. So we did get a bit lucky there, but we did also brick with lands for a few turns, so against Esper, no point in sideboarding here. The only time I've been sideboarding against Esper is if I see Archon of Emeria. The thing is with Esper is you do want your linear and proactive game plan to be as good as possible because they are, you know, if their removal lines up well against you, like they have something like a Void Rend or a Skyclave Apparition to kill Cabaretti Revels, and then they have removal for your other stuff. It can be a bit of a struggle, so having a strong proactive game plan is really important. So I don't like preemptively bringing in Skyclave Apparition unless I see Archon of Emeria, because a lot of the Esper decks that I've faced either aren't running Archon of Emeria at all, or I don't see it when I play against them. So, and plus I've been able to beat Archon of Emeria multiple times, mainly getting Cabaretti Rebels into play and then winning off the back of Trelisara or Voice of the Blessed. So yeah, I don't like bringing in Apparition unless I see a hate piece like Archon of Emeria in this matchup. So going second here, yeah, I mean, Cabaretti Rebels is such an important card in this matchup that I think we have to keep. And, you know, Cabaretti Rebels with Voice of the Blessed and Trelisara is sick as well because it guarantees to pull a Lunarch Veteran out of the deck, so it immediately starts growing them. So even though we do need to hit our third land here, I'm definitely happy to keep this because Cabaretti Rebels is just such a strong card in this matchup as well. Makes it really hard for them to favourably interact with you. So hitting the overground farmland is huge here. We now have our third land for Revels, and we have double white for Voice of the Blessed here, which is pretty sick. Okay, so they plunder. We'll definitely pitch a Trelisara here since we have the second one. Okay, Racketeer Boss is a nice draw here. I think I'm going to play the overgrown farmland first because I want to get Revels into play before we play the Trelisara or the Voice of the Blessed to get value off it. I think playing a Trelisara or Voice of the Blessed into potential removal is just wasting potential value we can get off Revels on later turns because Esper is essentially a mid-range deck. You know, they're not going to be killing us particularly quickly, so we can afford to play a bit more slowly and get more value off of our cards. So I have Diviner of Fates, which is fine, you know, they're going to start getting value, but we tend to go over the top of what they're doing anyway, so letting them get a bit of value is completely fine in this matchup, I think. So we'll just be slamming Revels next turn for sure, and then We could even try and go for the second Revels. There's no card in the format that punishes you for playing 2 cards of the same name. You know, there's no Maelstrom Pulse or anything like that. So getting a second Revels in play just means that you're more insulated against stuff like Voidrend and Skyclave Apparition if they're running that. Okay, City Stalker Connoisseur is going to get rid of the second Revel, so that does take that option away, but that's not a huge deal, I don't think. So just got to decide here whether we want to go Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara first. I think since we have the second Trelisara and Scrying is pretty valuable here, I'm going to go for Trelisara first, and then if they have some sort of removal for it, we can just play the second one next turn. And the other thing is, now that we're going to have access to 4 lands next turn, we can play Voice of the Blessed and another 2-drop, which means that we can get Voice of the Blessed almost immediately into a flyer, and then we're pretty close to then giving it indestructible as well, which limits their options as ways to remove it, and obviously helps to close the game up pretty quickly as well, which is important. Okay, so discard Bind to Secrecy. So it's very important they didn't have that on our Cabaret Rebels turn. Since we're going to pop up with a bunch of Lifegain here, we're definitely not going to block. Even though we have the second Trelisara in hand, you know, there's an argument to potentially blocking the City Stalker Connoisseur there, but I'm not that fussed at all. Since we have Voice of the Blessed that can attack in the air, we're not too worried about that blocking on the ground. Plus, Trelisara will get big enough that they'll probably have to block with the Connoisseur on defense anyway, and then we can play Trelisara after that, so that's the really nice thing about this deck. You barely ever have to worry about getting raced because of the amount of Lifegain in the deck. And hopefully, as you'll see next turn, you can get so many different Lifegain enablers into play off Cabaret Rebels. Like, the Lifegain game plan with Rebels is so strong. So opponents in the tank here, we would obviously like them to tap out because then we can sort of go off. So it's a bit annoying that we had to play one of those pathways on red there, because it means that we can't go for both Voice and Trelisara next turn. And obviously with Ignus in our deck, we would quite like to hold on to Racketeer Boss in case we draw the Grinning Ignus, but there's definitely an argument to going Voice of the Blessed and Racketeer Boss next turn, just to get tons of value off the Revels and make Voice of the Blessed really big, really fast here. So well, we'll see what we draw. Oh wow, okay, we did draw the Ignus. Okay, that's sick. So now we can go Voice of the Blessed, Racketeer Boss, and since we drew the Ignus, we're getting value off the Racketeer Boss as well. So we'll get tons of triggers for our Voice of the Blessed and Trelisara this turn, which is sick. Definitely don't want an extra land here, I don't think. Now Voice of the Blessed will trigger these 2 life enablers, and then we can go Racketeer Boss, and then yeah, okay, Inquisitor Captain's a pretty good card to keep on top here. Now I have to imagine, since they've left mana open here and they attacked, they probably will Trelisara, but that's actually fine because we have the second one in hand, and they're also going to have to deal with Voice of the Blessed. So we're going to get a ton of triggers here. We've also got Inquisitor Captain on top for next turn, which is gas. And then we can obviously give Trelisara and Grinning Ignus the perpetual ability of Racketeer Boss to allow us to combo off next turn. And we're only 3 more activations away from giving Voice of the Blessed indestructible here as well, which is sick. So we'll get in for potentially 12 damage. Now again, I have to assume they have removal for the Trelisara. Oh wow, they just have Vanishing Verse for the Voice of the Blessed. So they're going to have to take 12 damage here. So I'm a little surprised they attacked with the Connoisseur. I guess they were trying to race us, but I don't think that's going to work out too well for the opponent here. So that is a little bit annoying that they had an answer to Voice of the Blessed, because that would have been how we win next turn with Grinning Ignus. Although having said that, that doesn't really matter at all, because we have Ignus with Cabaret Rebels, so we'll just get to play basically our whole deck off the Rebels anyway. Just means that we would have won a little bit quicker had they not killed the Voice of the Blessed. So they Mythic Massacre, which, you know, if we hadn't drawn the Ignus, that would have been a little bit annoying, but we do have Inquisitor Captain on top of the deck, which would have been decent at recovering. And okay, sick. They tap out. Like, we would have been a little bit worried if they hadn't tapped out, because they can kill Grinning Ignus once we get a Lifegain enabler into play. I'm going to attack with Trelisara first here, just because we are going to hit Trelisara off the Grinning Ignus through Cabaret Rebels. So we might as well attack first. Now we can just keep looping the Ignus and just play everything out of our deck, which is sick. So we'll put Ignus back to our hands, cast the Ignus again. And yeah, like I was saying, oh well, we've hit Dina already, that's really good. Like I was saying, the opponent can kill, like, if we weren't getting any triggers off Enter the Battlefield, it's actually impossible for the opponent to stop Grinning Ignus with creature removal, because you return it to your hand as part of the cost. But if we have a Lifegain enabler in the battlefield, they get a chance to respond to the Prosperous Innkeeper trigger. So, had they not tapped out there, going for Ignus this turn would have been a little bit risky if they have creature removal, but since they tapped out, we can just cleanly go for the win here. And since we got since we got the Dina out of the deck pretty quickly, we don't have to worry about potentially timing out here, because we're gonna kill them pretty quickly, which is nice. And we don't have Tradisar on the battlefield to have to go through the scries either, so this should be pretty quick. So get more triggers here. Bounce the Ignus back to my hand. Again, I'm using spacebar just to save a bit of time when we're submitting to sack the treasure. So we get another Racketeer Boss in play. Triggers our Lifegain enablers. Triggers Dina. And then one more leave for this and we should win the game. Not to mention the 14/14 Voice of the Blessed over there as well. Sweet, we got there.
Okay, so we're going first here. And yeah, this looks decent. We've got a pretty nice curve out here. We're definitely going to lead on the Jetmir's Garden. And then, you know, even regardless of what else we draw, we can go Veteran on 2, Rebels on 3, Captain on 4, which is a pretty sick curve out. You know, going Rebels into Captain is pretty nice. Okay, so we're against Esper here, which I think is a pretty good matchup overall. Okay, so drawing another land here isn't great, but the fact it's Jetmir's Garden is pretty nice because it means we can always cycle it away if we need to. Getting Rebels into play against Esper is huge, so that was really big. Youthful Valkyrie. Oh, okay, so they're on Angels then. Interesting. Probably even better for us, I think, because that probably means they're running less interaction. So we'll definitely slam the Captain here. And now we hit an Innkeeper. We'd love to hit a Lifegain payoff. Okay, sick. So even though we do want Bergie in play to enable Ignus, I think getting Tradisara here is much better because we have nothing in hand. We want to make sure we scried something good. So Voice of the Blessed, you know, I typically don't like topping on the first scry. If, you know, we have 4 scries here, so it feels like a little bit of a waste topping on the first one, but I think Voice of the Blessed is going to be really good against Angels specifically. You know, they could be running Vanishing Verse or Skyclave Apparition, but if they don't, if we can get Voice of the Blessed into a flying creature, it's going to be so hard for them to deal with, so I'm trying to think what land to play first here, because we're definitely going to be going Voice of the Blessed, scrying, and then using the Jetmir's Garden to cycle into whatever we want to draw. So we'll get a bunch of scry triggers off Tradisara here, which is pretty huge. Definitely don't want to land. Ignus, even without a way to make it go infinite, is pretty sick, even with Rebels in play, because you can just recast it like 3 or 4 times using its ability normally and get a bunch of stuff into play off Rebels. So Ignus would be a good hit. Okay, Captain's a good hit. I'm happy to keep that on top. And now we're one more Lifegain activation away from Voice of the Blessed becoming a 6/6, which is pretty sick. So we can attack in with Tradisara and Inquisitor Captain. Okay, they do have Wandering Emperor, which is a little bit annoying, but I'm not too concerned about that considering we have Voice of the Blessed as well. If we just had Tradisara, I think there's an argument to not attacking with the Tradisara there, but since I've got Voice of the Blessed already, and we've got Inquisitor Captain on top of the deck, I don't think that's a huge issue. Okay, so they minus the Wandering Emperor, so that's dealt with already, which is huge. We can just cycle away the Jetmir's Garden here, because we definitely have enough lands already. Okay, Innkeeper's a pretty sick draw, so we can Innkeeper first before the Captain here, and then Voice of the Blessed will just get absolutely huge. So unless they have Vanishing Verse, we're going to be forcing them to chump block with the Valkyrie and then threatening lethal next turn, which is pretty sick. So we're going to get, what, Oh, 5 triggers. Okay, sick. We didn't even have to play the captain there. So, again, I think this is a matchup where I'm not bothered about bringing Apparition in unless we see Archon of Emeria, which they could very well be running, you know. I think it would suit their deck quite well if they were sideboarding Archon of Emeria, but Archon of Emeria isn't even a complete game over against our deck. I've beaten Archon of Emeria multiple times just off the back of Voice of the Blessed and Trelasara, and their deck is just slow enough where our proactive game plan is going to be able to beat them fairly easily. You know, they're not going to have great ways to stop the combo unless they have a lot of removal or Archon of Emeria, so if we do see Archon of Emeria, I think I will change my sideboarding going into game 3, bring in some Apparitions, but until then I'm pretty happy. So on a 6, this isn't ideal because we have 2 tap lands, but we have Racketeer Boss with double Grinning Ignus, so we can play the Racketeer Boss. Oh wow, okay, sick. So we drew an untapped land, which means we can play it this turn, which is pretty sick. But yeah, we can play the Racketeer Boss here, give both of our Grinning Ignuses the Perpetual Treasure ability, and now all we need really is a Lifegain enabler, and then we can kind of pop off with the Trelasara here. Interesting. So we drawn another Burgi here. I think I'm going to lead on Burgi because if we can keep this Burgi in play, we can then generate infinite mana off the Grinning Ignus. Okay, they do have an answer for it, but if had they not killed the Burgi there, we can just keep looping Grinning Ignus with Burgi and still net a treasure every single time. Okay, so drawing a land here is pretty nice because I think I'm kind of interested in trying to play Burgi as the Harnfell Horn here, because we have Trelasara as a payoff for Lifegain enabler. All we need to hit now is either Cabaretti Revels or a Lifegain enabler, and the Horn on Burgi will really help us to do that. You know, we don't really have anything, we don't have much to do with infinite mana. Okay, sick. We hit the 5th land so we can play the Horn now, which is great, but had we just played Burgi as the creature, yeah, we could have made infinite mana off the Grinning Ignus, but we don't really have much to do with that mana, whereas Harnfell, you know, we want to be digging for a Lifegain enabler or Cabaretti Revels in order to win with the Ignus, so Harnfell will just help us dig to that, which is important. Plus it makes us less vulnerable to creature removal, which I'm guessing they'll have brought in against us, so... Okay, so they have Valkyrie here. Okay, they don't attack, which is nice. So we'll draw a land, but it doesn't really matter because we can just discard it to the Horn. Okay, so unfortunately we didn't find a Lifegain enabler or a Cabaretti Revels, but we've got Voice of the Blessed as well now, which means that if we do hit a Lifegain enabler, we can make Voice of the Blessed huge and stop them attacking in the air, which is pretty huge. Okay, Furge's Retribution. That's a bit scary because they can start killing our stuff next turn, so hopefully Horn can get us there this turn, we'll see. But I mean, the great thing about Horn, you know, we have 8 Lifegain enablers and 4 Cabaretti Revels, so our chances of hitting one of them is pretty reasonably high, I think. Wow, okay, sick. So we just win here then. We hit the Cabaretti Revels, which is sick. And now we can just basically use the Revels to put our whole deck into play, basically. Until we can win off the Dina. I mean, even if we don't win with the Dina, we're going to be making Trelasara and Voice of the Blessed way too big anyway, so doesn't really matter. Okay, we can give the Grinning Ignus in our hand a second perpetual ability now, so we can start using the other Grinning Ignus to give us infinite mana here as well, which will allow us to cast the second Revels if we wanted to, so we should definitely win here. We just have to start hitting some Lifegain enablers and Dina before we time out. Okay, sweet. So there's a Lifegain enabler, and now we're going to start putting a bunch of counters on all of our creatures, which is sick. Scrying here again, you know, probably is a bit of a waste of time, but there is a chance that we time out if, like, Dina's the last card that we hit. I'm going to play Revels just to speed up the process a little bit here, because then we'll get 2 creatures into play each time we do the loop. Okay, another Trelasara. Again, I'm going to scry just because you can do it pretty quickly. As soon as I hit a decent non-land, I'm going to stop scrying. Okay, sick. Okay, so we're going first here. And yeah, this looks pretty reasonable. We got Innkeeper into Voice... Well, we don't have the second wipe for Voice of the Blessed yet, but We can go Innkeeper into Bergie even if we don't draw the second white. We've also got Captain at the top of our curve, so even though we don't have the second white for Voice of the Blessed, we've got a few turns to find it, and we've got decent other plays even if we don't draw it, so this is a pretty good keep, I think. See what the opponent's on here. Okay, Esper again. A lot of Esper on the ladder at the moment by the looks of things. So we'll definitely slam the Innkeeper here. And then we could go for Captain next turn, potentially, if we wanted to. They foretell a card. And we hit a white land, so it looks like they're probably on control. I don't think Esper Midrange really runs many foretell cards. And since I'm concerned that that's potentially Doomscar, I'm going to run out of Voice of the Blessed here, because if we use up our treasure to go for Inquisitor Captain and they just sweep all 3 of our creatures, that's kind of a disaster. Whereas if they... Okay, they have March, but I was going to say, if they Doomscar just an Innkeeper and a Voice of the Blessed, following up with Inquisitor Captain is decent. We could have also played the Horn there. I think getting Horn into play... Okay, out of these two I definitely think we want Bergie, but getting Horn into play against control is pretty huge, because the only real way they can deal with it is March for, you know, what, 6 mana, which is really difficult for them to do. Okay, so it was Doomscar. But it looks like we'll be able to resolve the Horn here, which is pretty important, because that will just basically mean we're essentially drawing 2 cards a turn if they don't have a way to kill it, which is pretty huge. Because Innkeeper on its own isn't that great here, so we can just pitch one of our lands to Horn next turn, see what we hit. So definitely going to pitch the land first here, you know, Racketeer Boss. We ideally want to have Ignus in hand. Okay, Bergie and Trelisara is nice. I think we're going to lead on the Innkeeper here. I guess we could have led on Bergie. Actually, yeah, it's probably correct to lead on Bergie first, so we don't have to use up a treasure. If we'd played Bergie first, we would have got a red mana off the Innkeeper, so that was my bad. And also, that now means that they could potentially draw a disruption this Trelisara, so that was pretty bad on my part. Okay, thankfully we didn't get punished for it. I mean, we did lose a treasure, so we kind of did get punished for it a bit, but I think we can do better than Innkeeper, especially with Horn in play, but yeah, we definitely should have... I was just playing a bit too quickly there. I was valuing the 1 life of Innkeeper over the treasure that we would have saved off Bergie, so they got Cyber Siphoner. They're going to put Doomscar back into hand. That's not as scary as Divine Purge, thankfully, because if they do use Doomscar here, they have to kill their own Siphoner, so... Okay, Celestus. So definitely control here and not mid-range, which is good to know. Okay, they play Teferi, so they can untap Celestus and a land here. And we'll see if they foretell the Doomscar here. If not, then that kind of gives away that they have 2 mana interaction, so we'll see what they do. Interesting, so that must mean they have 2 mana interaction, surely. I definitely don't... I'm not sure whether I want to use Horn here. We could pitch the Racketeer Boss, because we don't have Ignus, but I think I'm just going to attack Teferi here and see what they do. Okay, interesting. So they just block with the Cyber Siphoner. Since we know they have Doomscar and they're probably going to use it this turn, I think it's definitely a big mistake to commit anything to the board. And because of that, I don't think it's worth using the Horn. You know, Racketeer Boss is useful to have in case we draw the Ignus, and Voice of the Blessed is obviously great as well, when we especially now we have an Innkeeper in play. But yeah, we don't want to overextend into Doomscar because they're pretty incentivized to play it this turn to save their Teferi, which is important. So they're down to 1 card in hand. They don't... Okay, Witness the Future. I mean, that's not too bad. And they have to plus Teferi. They can't minus it here, so... And they're tapped out, so there is potential possibility for us to combo if we get very lucky off Horn here. But, I mean, I guess they can untap, so... They will have access to some instant speed interaction if they're running 2 mana stuff. Okay, so the Celestus triggers... Okay, nice. So we can pitch the land here pretty confidently. Hitting 2 more lands isn't great. Definitely think we want to play the Voice of the Blessed here, and I think, you know, there is an argument to potentially playing Racketeer Boss to try and apply pressure, but their deck isn't going to have great ways to beat the combo if we do manage to combo. You know, they could have instant speed removal to kill Ignus, but in general, I think it's... You know, if we play the Racketeer Boss here and they have like another sweeper, we're just completely out of gas at that point. So I like holding on to it just as a way to potentially threaten the combo later in the game. And they're not. It's not like historic or explorer decks where Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is just going to win them the game. This Teferi is going to get them advantage gradually, but wow, okay, so we do have the combo here. Well, we don't have a Lifegain enabler, but we do have Ignus, Bergi, and Racketeer Boss now, which is pretty sick. I mean, looping Ignus on this board doesn't really do anything, but we can bounce Ignus back to hand here, which will then allow us to Racketeer Boss and give it the Perpetual ability next turn, which is pretty huge, because we do want to get Racketeer Boss into play in order to apply pressure. You know, a 3-2 for 2 is reasonable at applying pressure against control here, so okay, they have discovered the formula, which is a little bit scary, but yeah, now we've got Ignus in hand, we can pretty happily play the Racketeer Boss to apply pressure, and we're getting value off it because of the Ignus. And additionally, we have infinite mana here as well, so if we hit something good off the horn next turn, and the opponent doesn't have instant speed interaction, we could potentially combo off. You know, if they did happen to tap out for something here, that would be huge, because we can go Racketeer Boss, give Ignus the Perpetual ability, and then we have infinite mana with Bergi. So if we happen to hit something like a Revels off the horn, we can just win. Okay. Lunarch Veteran's interesting, because we could play it, or we could discard it to the horn in order to oh wow, they had Helix off the key. I was going to say we could discard it to the horn to play it at the backside and get value off it, and we could still gain infinite life with Ignus. So since we already have Bergi in play, I'm going to activate the horn here. Yeah, thinking about it, maybe it was a misplay not to discard the Lunarch Veteran to the horn, because now we're kind of in a situation where if they kill the Bergi, we can't go infinite, and we still would have been able to go infinite with the backside of Lunarch Veteran. Okay, they had a counter spell for the Ignus anyway, so it didn't end up mattering. But yeah, I think I probably missequenced that turn. I think, had I not played that quickly, I think I probably should have discarded the Lunarch Veteran to the horn to see... Okay, Divine Purge is a little bit rough, but yeah, we probably should have discarded the Lunarch Veteran if we were going to activate the horn, played it from the graveyard, and then tried to go infinite with the Voice of the Blessed off the backside of Lunarch Veteran. I mean, thankfully Divine Purge does allow us to just replay this stuff, and wow, okay, Trelisara is a nice draw here, so we can play the Lunarch Veteran and then play the Trelisara here, which is pretty nice. But yeah, I'm a little bit annoyed about that misplay last turn. I think I was just playing a bit too quickly there. So we can scry land to the bottom, that's fine. I mean, to be honest, even drawing a land isn't too bad, because we can just immediately pitch it to the horn. Okay, Bag of Holding is interesting. I've never seen that in control before. Okay, so they Fateful Absence Trelisara, that's fine, because we can just immediately crack the treasure here. I mean, obviously we'd have liked to have Trelisara into play, because the scry is really nice. And obviously it'll become a huge creature as well. Wow, okay, Ignus. So we've got another shot of the combo here, which is important. So we'll definitely discard the land first here, just to see what we hit. Okay, we hit land and Innkeeper, which is fine. So I'm going to lead on the Bergi here. And then play the Innkeeper. I mean, again, like, we could have gained an extra life doing it the other way around, but we're against control. I very much doubt the extra life is going to make a huge difference here. And that way round could have enabled us... Well, doing it this way round basically enables us to loop the Ignus as well to gain infinite life if we wanted to, so... But, like I said, I very much doubt the extra life past 29 is really going to matter in this matchup. Okay, so they've got Bag of Holding, they've got Painful Bond and Siphoner underneath it, which is interesting. And I mean, now we're in a position where if everything survives, if we hit a Revels or a Voice of the Blessed or Trelisara off the top, well, off the horn, we can just combo off out of nowhere, which is pretty huge. Wow, okay, so the opponent's out of cards, so if we get a good hit off Horn, we can just win this turn. Because they don't have enough mana to get Cyber Siphoner from underneath the Bag of Holding and get back removal. Wow, okay, sick. So that's... we should win the game here then, right? Because we can play Dina, we can then just combo off with the Grinning Ignus as well. Now they could... hold on, how much mana do they have? They have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they could activate Bag of Holding and then Painful Bond to try and hit a removal spell. If they didn't have the Painful Bond underneath the Bag of Holding, the Cyber Siphoner in their hand would only cost 2, but because they have the Painful Bond, it costs them 4. Which means that they're just short of being able to go Bag of Holding, Cyber Siphoner, Fateful Absence. I think. Yeah, they're one short of doing that. So they kind of have to Painful Bond to try and find like a Fateful Absence off the top here. So they do Painful Bond. Wow, and it looks like they didn't hit anything. Well, that's like Arena's kind of giving it away here a little bit. But yeah, we should just win that. I mean, that was kind of like an ideal hit off the Horn there. And we did misplay a couple of times that game, but thankfully we didn't get punished for it. So against control, we definitely want Thalia and Spellbinder. And we can just cut Trellisora, we can trim Voice of the Blessed, and then go down to 1 Innkeeper. I don't ever cut Innkeeper entirely from the deck because when you're comboing off with Revels, you want to be able to have a single Innkeeper in the deck so that you can cast, if you draw Dina, you want to be able to cast it off the treasure of Innkeeper. So even if you end up drawing Dina, simply by having 1 Innkeeper in your deck, that will mean that you're guaranteed to be able to get a treasure. You know, you're guaranteed to hit an Innkeeper, which will give you a treasure that you can cast the Dina off. And then Voice of the Blessed, like I said, I think it's definitely the better of the two to keep in because, especially against control, it's much better as a finisher, and it's much more difficult to remove as well because Trellisora can be killed by destruction effects, it can be chump blocked, whereas Voice of the Blessed, once you've got it up to the indestructible, it can't be killed by destruction effects, can't be killed by Wandering Emperor because it has vigilance, and it can't be chump blocked unless the opponent has flyers either. So Voice of the Blessed is much better as a finisher. But having access to Thalia and Elite Spellbinder definitely gives us the edge going into games 2 and 3. And we still have access to the combo as well. And it makes it obviously a lot more difficult for them to disrupt it if we have a Thalia in play or we've used Elite Spellbinder to tax whatever interaction they have. So this hand looks pretty reasonable, I think. It's a little bit annoying that we have 2 tap lands, especially because, you know, on the draw against control, that means that we're very likely to be playing into counter spells on curve, but, you know, having 3 Inquisitor Captains and our 4th land here. Oh wow, Strict Proctor, okay. That's rough. Strict Proctor is going to be very difficult for our deck to beat, I think. Well, I mean, we'll see actually. I think this is the first time I've faced Strict Proctor with this deck. Not many people have played it in Alchemy from my experience, but I mean, it's definitely not impossible. We can play Voice of the Blessed next turn and pay the 2, which will turn it into a 3-3, and then we can just start applying pressure. And I mean, again, it's not, you know, I've played against a lot of Strict Proctor decks in Historic, for example. Yeah, we'll definitely get... I mean, we could play Bergie here, which opens up our mana a little bit, but I think I prefer being a bit more mana efficient here and going for Voice of the Blessed. Because if we draw a land for next turn, we can then play Bergie, pay the 2 again and turn Voice of the Blessed into a 4-4. But yeah, like I was saying, the power level of the Alchemy control decks is so much slower than Historic that Strict Proctor will slow us down a bit, but I don't think it's going to be that problematic, hopefully. Well, I mean, we'll see this game, we'll see how we do this game. Okay. So, I think we'll lead on the Bergie here. And the great thing about Bergie with Proctor is it will provide us with extra mana in order to pay for the Proctor tax. So next turn, if we draw an untapped land, we can play the Captain, and then even though we only have 5 lands, we could... Oh, okay, I mean, they killed the Bergie, but had the Bergie survived there, we could have played Captain with 5 lands, and since Bergie gives us a red mana, we can then still pay 2 for the Proctor tax. Okay, so we draw another land here, which is actually quite important with Captains in our hand. We want to get to the point where we can start playing Captains, and pay for the proc attacks to just get multiple creatures in play. Okay, they have another Fateful Absence here, which is a little bit annoying, but as long as we keep hitting lands, we should be fine here. If we can get to the point where we can pay for the proc attacks and still get the captain trigger, we're in a great spot, because we have 3 captains, so even if they have removal... Okay, sick, we did. Yeah, even if they have removal, we're going to be able to recover pretty handily with 3 Inquisitor captains. Okay, they don't have a counterspell, which is really important. Okay, I need to make sure I'm paying for the right one. It would kind of be a disaster if we paid 2 just to gain a life here. I mean, it's a bit annoying we don't get the Spellbinder ability, but a 3/1 flyer is going to be difficult for them to ignore. I mean, I guess since they only have Proctor on the battlefield, the 3/3 captain is also a big problem. Like, they can actually trade with the Spellbinder, whereas they can't with the captain. I mean, as I was just saying, I'm kind of surprised they didn't kill the captain there. I guess maybe it's just in their head that Spellbinder is just a good card against control, which it is, but I think on that board state, captain's the more problematic card, because it can't be killed by Wandering Emperor, and they can't trade with it with Proctor. So yeah, I'm a little surprised they didn't just pay 5 there to kill the captain instead of the Spellbinder. So they make a 2/2. I mean, either way, had they double blocked, I would have been happy to kill the Proctor, but they didn't, thankfully. So again, I think I'm happy to play another captain here. They've only got 1 mana available, so there's no way they're going to be able to counter this, which is important. Just want to make sure that we're paying paying the right tax here. We definitely want the captain ability rather than the Innkeeper. Oh, nice. So I think we want Thalia here. Bergie is nice at unlocking a bit of our mana, and it does threaten the combo if they do end up chump blocking with the Proctor, but I think getting Thalia into play is going to be really important here, because that'll tax their mana as well. Okay, another strict Proctor is pretty annoying. But again, they're not pressuring us, really. I still think, even though they're slowing us down a lot with these Proctors, we still have just reasonably sized creatures on the board that we can just attack through the Proctors with. You know, that's the other great thing about this deck. Loads of the combo pieces and loads of the creatures are just like okay sized creatures anyway. You know, Captain's a 3/3, Racketeer Boss is a 3/2, Bergie's a 3/3, you know, that's reasonable stats to just attack if the opponent's relying on their hate pieces. So, thankfully, since Proctor's a 2/4, we can freely attack here. I think we're more incentivized to attack down the Wandering Emperor, because that's going to slow us down more than anything else. They're obviously just going to block with the Proctor here, but we get to kill the Wandering Emperor, which is pretty sick. Now, we could play the Horn here, but I quite like going for Inquisitor Captain. Although saying that, maybe that was a bit greedy. I was going to say I want to keep committing stats to the board here, because if they do have a Wrath, it kind of incentivizes them to play it, and then it will just kill their own Proctor. But we could have just waited an extra turn before playing the Captain there, because we could have then paid for both of the Proctor taxes and got another creature in play. So maybe it was greedy. Maybe we should have just played the Horn there, and then we would have been better off if they have a sweeper. You know, we would have still had the Captain to be able to follow that up with. Wow, okay, so Proctor counters their own key to the archive there, but I mean, it's hurting us a lot more than it's hurting them, so that's not a huge deal for the opponent there, I don't think. So, I mean, we've still got a pretty reasonable board state here. The one thing I am a little bit worried about here is Divine Purge, because they could play Divine... Well, actually, no, since we have Inquisitor Captain on the battlefield, that doesn't really affect us. I was going to say, Divine Purge would then allow them to replay the strict Proctors again, but since we have 3 Captains in play, Divine Purge isn't really that great. They could play Doomscar, but again, that would kill their own strict Proctors, at which point our whole deck is basically just unlocked again, so we're just going to attack down the Teferi here. See if they block. Okay, sweet, that kills the Teferi. And now, since they're pretty much tapped out, I'm happy to just go for the Horn here. And now we have a pretty good way... Well, now we have a pretty good way to just ensure that we're just drawing well for the rest of the game, because we can turn any bad top decks into just looking 2 more cards deep. And again, if they play a sweeper, we have a pretty good way to recover as well. So I think we're just going to start using the Horn here. Might as well start seeing how much value we can get off it. Interesting. So we got Racketeer Boss here. I mean, annoyingly... Wait, how much mana does the opponent have? I'm just trying to think if they can activate their creature land. I'm going to lead on the Racketeer boss anyway here. There is an argument to... Oh, okay, I was going to say, there is potentially an argument to attacking first, but they, with the key to the archive, they do have enough mana to activate Hall of Storm Giants, which is a bit problematic. So I think here I'm actually happy to pay for the Racketeer boss, just so if they do eventually have to either sweep the board or chump block with the strict proctors, that will have 2 Grinning Ignuses that can combo off. You know, it's great that we have 2 in hand here because we have a backup basically. And then we'll just play the Lunarch Veteran. And so yeah, the opponent is in quite a tough spot here because if they ever block with the proctors, that enables us to combo. And the more we commit to the board, the more they kind of have to sweep the board. If they do sweep the board, then the proctors are dead, and then we can combo off. So even though they're at a fairly high life total because of the Teferi here, I don't mind our position really. Okay, so they Fateful Absence the Inquisitor Captain, which is interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have enough mana to crack the clue here, but we still have a pretty decent board presence. I mean, it's a bit annoying that they have a 2/4 strict proctor because we can't attack with the Racketeer boss, but interesting. So I think I like leading on the Spellbinder here. It is a bit annoying, you know, we kind of want them to spend some of their mana because they can potentially just animate the Hall of Storm Giants to block with, which does stop a lot of our pressure down, but getting Spellbinder and using the ability here is going to be important just to see what they have. So we're not going to pay for the rest, we're not too bothered. Let's see what they're holding on to. Okay, so they Siphoner. We'll get back here. Okay, so they get back Discover the Formula, which is a little bit scary. They have to pay for their own proc attacks though, that's a little bit of a nombo. Oh wow, okay, so they do have a bunch of sweepers, but like I said, they're probably pretty reluctant to play them because Proctor is doing a lot of work for them. So I think we're just going to tax Discover the Formula because that is probably the most threatening card. You know, they could Cyber Siphoner, but they've just got a bunch of removal in the graveyard. Divine Purge and... oh wow, we get to kill one of the Proctors here. Okay, that's pretty huge. But yeah, Divine Purge and Doomscar take them off the Proctors, which will then allow us to combo off, which is pretty huge. So even though they have got a pretty stacked hand, they're in a pretty tough position where they don't really want to sweep, but they might have to if we just keep developing to the board. Wow, they just Doomscar. Okay, so that completely takes them off the Proctors, which is great for us. Okay, so we'll see what we draw here. So I think I'm going to lead on the Horn, just to keep 2-for-1ing them. You know, this is the way that we can get ahead on card advantage. So I'll lead on the Lunarch Veteran here. And then I think I'll just go for the Captain to see what we hit. Because if we do hit something like a Voice of the Blessed, I mean, they do have a Divine Purge, but... Okay, we hit Bergie, that's not bad. And then we can go for Infinite Life here if we wanted to. They Siphoner. I guess they're just going to get, yeah, Fateful Absence back. Probably to kill the Berg. I mean, we do get infinite mana here if they don't kill the Bergie. I guess they're going to try and kill the Ignus, but we then still have enough mana to cast the second one from hand. So yeah, since we have Bergie and Ignus that had the buff from Racketeer boss earlier, we can now generate infinite mana, which will then allow us to crack these clues that we've got, and then even if we don't draw anything great from the clues, we can discard them to the Horn. So we're basically setting up infinite mana here and trying to find either Dina or Cabaretti Rebels to win the game. Now it is important that we play quite quickly here because if we do time out, they can just Divine Purge everything away, which would be really bad. So yeah, we want to just make sure that we're doing this quickly. We're just going to keep creating treasures until we can crack clues, and then, like I said, if we draw something good that allows us to keep comboing, we'll just play that. If we don't, we can just discard whatever we draw to the Horn to look 2 cards deeper. So We essentially get to look through the top 6 of our library here, which is really nice, just to try and find something good. Spellbinder. Okay, we're not too bothered. Spellbinder's not really going to help us that much here, I don't think. Okay, Racketeer Boss will allow us to generate more mana slightly quickly. Again, Divine Purge is kind of scary here because, well, even more scary because they can also just exile all of the excess treasures we make. So even if we have infinite mana this turn, because they have Divine Purge, that will take us off infinite mana going forwards. So I think we're pretty incentivized to keep going here and just try and find something like a Revels or a Dina to help us win this turn. Because they are completely tapped out. We're not really going to get a better opportunity than this, I don't think. So now we're gaining an extra 2 treasures every time we loop. So it should make the process a little bit quicker here. We'll crack the clue and see what we find here. Again, we're looking for either Dina or Cabareti Revels. Okay, Failure isn't what we want, so we'll pitch that and see what we hit. Okay, sick. There we go. So we should win now. We hit the Revels. And now we just keep putting stuff into play. And thankfully, since we've cut Trelisara from the deck, it should make timing out much less of an issue because we don't have to worry about scrying every time we gain a life. And we have just generally less 2 and 1 drops in the deck, so we should be able to hit the Dina pretty quickly, which is great. So yeah, we're just looping the Ignus here until we hit Dina, and then we should just win the game. And this is the sort of situation I was talking about where it's important to have the one of Dina, so because if we didn't, if we just built up a load of Voice of the Blessed, they could just Divine Purge and sweep it all away the following turn. So this is the exact sort of situation I was talking about when I said it's important that you have the one of that can win you the game the same turn that you're going off with Revels. Okay, so we hit a Voice of the Blessed. That will start growing, but again, that's kind of irrelevant because the opponent has Divine Purge. And they also have, well, if they just had Doomscar, Voice of the Blessed could win the game because it can gain Indestructible pretty quickly now that we're basically going infinite with the Ignus. So we'll play it again. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to hit the Dina here. I don't know what the opponent has priority for because they have a blue mana floating, but they don't have anything they can cast for a blue mana. Maybe it's just that you just have priority when you have mana floating. I'm not sure. So we'll just keep looping the Ignus here. And again, you know, we don't have that many... Okay, sick. I was going to say we don't have that many 1 or 2 drops in the deck, so we should hit Dina pretty quickly, and now we have. And now any additional life gain enablers that we hit will just help us to kill quicker with the Dina. Okay, nice. Yeah, we got there.